You. And I think we're all ready. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, John. Well, welcome everybody again to Lit Balm. Can you believe it? We've been doing this now for 5 years, and we have had something like 700 poets and authors read on Lit Balm in that time. We have a great show coming up tonight with Eleanor Kedney, Hella Levinson, Jordan Dotson, Kristen Case, all fantastic poets and writers. But before we get started with that, let me introduce my co-host, Jeffrey Cyphers Wright, who received his MFA studying with Allen Ginsberg. He's best known as a new romantic poet. He's also a publisher, critic, eco-activist, impresario, filmmaker, puppeteer, and artist. He is the author of 19 books of verse, including Blue Liar and Party Everywhere. His poems have appeared in the Cafe Review, New American Writing, the Brooklyn Rail, the Hurricane Review, Posit, and many others. Also recently in anthologies such as Contemporary Surrealist and Magical Realist Poetry. Jeff's latest work is a book of sonnets and artwork called Doppelgangster, which came out with Mad Hat Press. And he recently won the Sir Vision James Tate Prize. That book is already out, and he publishes Live Mag.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks so much, man. Yeah, 5 years. It's really cool. I wasn't hosting till about 2 years ago, but especially when you started in the pandemic, it was really great to be able to do this. And yeah, it makes me nervous to try to do Zoom. So I was so happy to have Jonathan and your other helpers working on it, John. So this poem, I'll just read it a little slowly at first. It builds up some steam, but it's like, what? Okay, but I call it Sending Now. Ignorance is king when the king is an ignoramus. The Yahoo censors are blind to neologisms. I sing the body ekphrastic, claims the chatterbot. Thus, our efforts become echoes of the future. My bones will be flutes filled with chain fire. Dear Hillary, I miss you. Wakened by gray light, the day lumbers into a wooden parade, unafraid of the axe or saw or miracles that can't be unseen. My beak isn't embarrassed to slaughter language, reaching for survivors in a diminished dimension. Gantries stand sentry over the Delaware River, unashamed of their obsolescence. Rummaging through heaven's scrap heap, you keep me from being a mess. Fireworks in the love oven. So, and I wanted to give a shout out to Cassandra because I used the word ekphrastic, and she's the queen of the ekphrastics, right? So shout out to her. But yeah. I sing the body ekphrastic. That's what we are now, talking about AI and stuff, you know. We just have everything at our fingertips. And we'll be at somebody else's fingertips, except they'll all be dead, right? They're not going to make it. Let me introduce our host, Mark Vincennes. Mark.
Wait, Jeff. We
Yeah,
gotta do Cassandra first because I got.
Oh, you want me to introduce Cassandra?
Yeah, I got a poem of hers lined up that I was going to read. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but you got to introduce her first, yeah.
Oh, but I got to introduce you.
Yeah, me later, but first Cassandra.
Okay. Here we go. Let's see. Cassandra Atherton is an award-winning prose poet and international expert on prose poetry. Her prose poetry is widely anthologized and has been translated into Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. Cassandra has published more than 30 books and is currently writing an illustrated book of prose poetry on the Hiroshima Maidens with funding from the Australia Council and the Victorian government. Cassandra co-wrote prose, poetry, and introduction, and co-edited the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry. She is commissioning editor for Westerly magazine and a professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia, and we miss her. Mark.
So yeah, this is one of Cassandra's poems called The Forgetting Hiroshima Diptych. 1. Nothing happened in Hiroshima. Our story ends before we board the Shinkansen. You should take back the omelets wet with eggy juice and the miso soup served with 3 pieces of mackerel. We weren't there. We never sat cross-legged prizing oysters from their shells. You didn't cry at the museum in front of the keloid suspended in glass. Nothing happened in Hiroshima. Forget me straddling you in the blue of the Seto Inland Sea, your fingers mapping the irregular coastline down my backbone as a new language haunts our lips. Everything happened in Hiroshima in the deep silence. A mother calls her child's name as they pull bodies with a fire hook from the river. 2. Late night, you view the city through the pink of a Sakaru gin bottle. You're nameless in the lamp's sepia light, a ghost word in the distillery. I've seen the copper still like a shining missile, its funnel tapering into a golden plume. I've imagined leaving handprints on its surface, playing the oversized flute to hear the fizz of rising bubbles. I can't remember if I drank it straight or on ice, perhaps tonic. Did I take you back to my hotel room, or was it the night I remember slipping down my spine? Now, as lilac infuses early morning, I try to recall your laddered ribcage, the origin of 5 small bruises on my thigh, tangled up in bedsheets. All that lingers is the taste of peppery juniper.
All right, that was beautiful. Juniper. She works with some heavy stuff there, doesn't she?
She does.
All right, let me introduce our host here, Mark. Mark Vincennes is a poet, fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, musician, impresario, publisher. Here, look, I'm off the rails here. He's published many books of poetry, translations, and fiction, including more recently, The Pearl Diver of Iran, The King of Prussia is Drunk on Stars, and The Mayfly Codex. Many books are forthcoming, and White Pine Press, Spite and Dival, Unlikely Books, and he's also a prolific translator, translating from many languages: German, Romanian, Spanish, Icelandic, and French. He's also published 12 books of translations, most recently an Audible Blue, selected poems by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Mertz, which won the 2023 Massachusetts Book Prize for Translated Literature. He's currently working on a novel entitled The Age of Occasions. How's that going, Mark?
Good.
Okay, congratulations, man. Mark is an editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital, and that's his connection with Cassandra, because that's definitely an Australian joint there, on the Peak in Hong Kong. But now, Mark lives on a farm in rural western Massachusetts, overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, his inspiration from Moby Dick. And here, where Mark is, there are still more spring peepers, mud puppies, and red-bellied cooters than bipedal earthlings. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't know if any of you've seen some of the early movies of Cleopatra, but this short piece is inspired by some of those, and how its mythology has entered the bloodstream. It's called Cleopatra and Julius, a pre-code screen test, 1932, featuring Claudette Colbert and James Lydon. For Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV, and Cecil B. DeMille, in 3 very serious acts. 1. The stirring and the stirred. A billion glimmering motes follow her down the curved lintel stairway into an ancient crossbreeze. There, they move into a common populace, the slaves, the water bearers, the keepers of the eternal flame, the kneeling conch players, the lambskin drummers, the lithe-limbed dancers and tumblers, to a ship's captain and his brutish second mate, the 10,000 oars stirred into stirring. 2. The spilling and the spilled. Much like the wind, she too spills herself in anticipation, but in all her ferocity strides confidently feline toward the camera. Leopards and hyenas murmur in jangling chains. The growls and snarls spook a visiting Roman emperor who instructs his Etruscan vassals to bring bread and Falernian wine, lemon-poached sea snails wrapped in basil and char-grilled Andalusian oysters with diced garlic and shaved cheese on the half-shell. Yet the vision before him smiles more blissfully than Aphrodite in love. 3. The rising and the riven. Easy to say, he might have said, had further words reached his oyster-filled throat, but none did. And in that moment, as in olden times, he carelessly reached out to touch her skin, and in a crack of thunder, from the stirring darkness, the rains arrived, and the floodwaters rose. In her deluge, to her Roman co-star, she steps into her bejeweled barge of Ra, and says, "Aren't you a sight in your upwardly mobile sarcophagus, Jules? It was brighter once, when Isis was our judge and jailer." And now I'm delighted to introduce the first of our featured readers today, who is Eleanor Kedney, and is the author of 3 books, 12 Days from Transfer, Between the Earth and Sky, and the chapbook The Offering. 12 Days from Transfer is a 2024 New Mexico Arizona Book Award finalist. Between the Earth and Sky was a finalist for the 21 New Mexico Arizona Book Awards. Too. Her work has been published in many journals and magazines, and she's received many honors for individual poems, including the 29 River Sedge Poetry Prize and a finalist in the 2020 Dyslexia Poetry Competition. Eleanor founded the Tucson branch of the New York-based Writers Studio and served as the director for 10 years. She's been inspired by craft techniques utilized in her books, and she developed the Writing Toward Forgiveness workshop. She joined the Tucson Poetry Festival board in 21 and lives in Tucson, Arizona and Stonington, Connecticut, with her husband, Peter Schaffer, and their dog, Fred, and their cat, Ivy. Welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you, Mark and Jeffrey, and Cassandra, who's been wonderful at coordinating everything. Today, I'm going to read from my book, 12 Days from Transfer, published by 3 Ataos Press. And I want to say something about the title at first. 12 Days from Transfer is the amount of time between in vitro fertilization and knowing whether you're pregnant or not. And that arc of time is something that I really wanted to focus on in terms of bringing in a lot of universal emotions into the poetry. Originally, when Andrea Watson at Three Towels Press asked me if I would write a tightly themed book. I said yes, but I instinctually knew that the emotions around this theme were universal. And so I worked with a lot of tension in the poems to bring in loss and grief, but also joy and hope and disappointment and frustration, and create a tension throughout the book. So I'm going to read some poems that give you a little bit of sense of that tension. The first one I'm going to read is called Six Gray Moons on a Screen. And the poem is in 6 parts. 1, we were name making, Violet for its heart-shaped leaves, Patricia, the name chosen for my brother if he were a girl. My husband wanted April, his mother's hope after 3 sons. If a boy, Ethan, meaning strong, or David, beloved, shards picked up between thumb and forefinger, far flung slivers when the month's work of my body shattered. 2, at 12 days, the body flushes hope. The nurse said, you don't have to worry about the embryos. I think of the Flash River near my house, a leaf sprout carried downstream. Hours later, it's sand. 3, an article proclaims heaven is populated by the souls of embryos, conceived, unknown, lost in menstrual flow, not mourned. But ours were 6 gray moons on a screen. 4, they said there's always adoption. They said God has a plan. They said it'll happen. Trust me, you're lucky you don't have kids. They said hang in there. They said focus on your career. My husband just looks at me and I get pregnant. They said just relax, go on vacation. Maybe you weren't meant to have kids. They said you've got plenty of time. They said you can try IVF again. It's not the end of the world. They said everything but sorry. 5, I saved the quilted yellow picture frame with smiling white whales. 6, we met in a hot tub, a gin bottle in the snow. My husband knew the star clusters, diamond, beehive, jewel box, wishing well, Pleiades, pearl. The mountain trails sloped in the dark. Under the constellations' bright forms, our knees touched, and we danced and sat on a couch and then went back to our separate rooms. So a lot of the emotions in the book are sometimes considered contradictory. There's a poem where the speaker is relieved when the pregnancy test is negative, or there's poems where there is doubt and yet there's hope. And in many circles, women couldn't say, I don't want children. So this poem, Regret Requires Choice, addresses that, that feeling that having a child and being able to have a child is very normal and expected, but it's not always that way for everyone, and not everybody wants to have a child. So regret requires choice. 57, page 57. It can be said, every star was a mirage. My eyes linked to imaginary tips and angles, a hypotenuse, a garrulous quiet. I was never one who rolled on the floor, curved back a spinning top, octopus arms mixing my charms with theirs. It can be said, if my heart were plunged, I became indifferent, kept children's fingers sticky from raisins pinned in the air. It can be said, I couldn't say, I don't want children, bristled against strictures, admission tickets, while regret is the purview of the childless. Instead, I rode in light-line darkness, the moon-glazed sea leavened, my slicker drenched in the white-cap myth of mothering joy. Throughout this process, I sponsored some children in India. And since they were young teenagers, each of them are married now with children. They call me mom, and I have grandchildren, something that I never expected would happen. And it's a thread throughout the book that adds joy and hope. And they're long prose poems. So I'm not going to read a long prose poem. What I want to do is read the first section of one of the poems that's in two parts, and it's called Random Fieldstones. I didn't write down the page number for that one. I'll have to look it up. Me too. Random Fieldstones. When I speak of Sri Ram as my son, I offer you magic. The unseen flurry when a bond begins in one's heart and mind and flows as if a kiss blown into the universe. I place 7 fluorite hearts on gray cotton fabric, each one meant as a gift for people traveling with us. I ask Sri Ram if he would like to choose who gets which stone. He holds each heart one by one in his palm, and after a few quiet minutes, he names someone. The stones already had told me to whom they should go, and he picks as I had heard them. I smile. You're a stone listener. I didn't hold and feed Sri Ram as an infant, laugh with him as a small child, teach him to share a piece of cake with another, marvel when a butterfly lands on one's arm, or unwrap his early teenage years. We became like 2 tree branches, lengthening their reach toward the sun. Each thing learned about the other was a leaf sprout. When he swam laps in the hotel pool, his first time in a pool, I called to him, "How did you learn to swim?" He replied, "My mother put me in the well." So, and that's true. That one's a true story. So I wrote a poem called Descending Grace. Can't see, it's on one side of the page. And then Andrea Watson said, well, now you have to write Ascending Grace. So I was like, okay, what's that going to look like? And Ascending Grace really, Descending Grace is about what if it's the man? What if something's wrong with the man? And bringing the collection cup up to the lab, and what does it do to the marriage if it's the man? And then Ascending Grace kind of transcends that. This poem agrees. We are made of stardust, the egg that waited in vitro, the sperm that tried to win. Above, perpetual blue and draped willow canopies. Below, soil, granite, ocean, shells. Between, air, spirals, breath, rain. Folded hands, unfolding, fingers reach for you. We made zygotes, you say, dust between the stars. So, in the beginning of the book, it opens with a history of infertility, and it's a wee narrator, and it's a list poem of the ages of infertility treatments and what was done to women, and the silence, the fact that women couldn't talk about it. But then the next poem is called Women Pruning Pear Trees. It's a little long to read, but it's 3 stanzas. And then I invert it, and each stanza is inverted, and each line is inverted. So the book opens with this inversion poem and the image of the pear. And then I end the book with women pruning pear trees. And hopefully in terms of the whole collective voice that it ends with, is that everybody can put their own piece into the story, their own grief into the story. And this whole image of the pear, returns. So this is how the book ends. And women pruning pear trees. When someone in the grief group shared, "Some mornings I don't get out of bed," or "I hate my body. I wonder if my husband will leave me. I don't know my purpose in life." I listened, both hands in my lap, left on top of right, palms up. I read aloud newly written poems about autumn rain, apple pie, walking my dog Shayna. At the end of the 8-week session, Jan invited us to her house to prune pear trees. It was February, snow possible, the weather perfect for cultivating hardiness. She laid the tools on the ground, secateurs, loppers, saws, pole pruners. We thinned out weak crossing branches, keeping the ones with the least angle at their origin, avoided cutting fruit spurs, removed water spores. We took the dead and damaged limbs, knowing the unsung trees might not fruit that year, but with our work, they might the next. Inside, there was lentil soup and warm bread, a long table. We hung our coats and sat down, joking about who worked the hardest. I rubbed my cold hands together. On my wrist, a small scratch flared. My arms ached from reaching toward the canopy. So this is the last poem I'm reading. I will put in the chat a link to a review of the book that came out 2 days ago in Tupelo Quarterly. I also just want to share that the book really is for men as well as women. And I've had some interesting comments from men who said, it's a spiritual journey I never would have been on without the book. And the grief is universal. And so I just invite you to read the review and think about this topic and share the conversation with women in your life. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that was so marvelous, Eleanor. Really beautiful. Exquisite. I have women in my life I like to talk about. I mean, too. So that's a good idea, though. I like that.
Thank you so much.
Gerald is, let me quote one thing. Gerald is quiet. Okay, take it away, Mark. Thank you, Eleanor.
Next, we hear from Hella Levinson, whose most recent books are Query Caboodle, Shift Gristle from Black Widow Press, The Abyssal Recitations from Concrete Mist Press, Valvular Ash from BWP, and Query Caboodle 2, Sulfur. Crossfall is slated for release this summer. His book, Lure, won the 2022 Big Other Poetry Book Award. Welcome, Hella. You need to unmute.
Thank you, Mark and Jeff and everyone for having me. Just 1 second. Okay, so we've talked about whales. I have a whale poem here it's kind of a hymnal to the endangered species. Today we're all endangered, but this particular is for the whale. A few comments. Odontocetes, the word means tooth is another word for toothed whale. In the image, Harley's in the poem is is meant to correspond to the majesty of the motorcycles, kind of contiguous with a school magisterial school of Wales. I'm not seeing anything on the screen here except Mark's picture. Is everything working okay?
We're fine. We see you.
Okay. So, and then the last, second to last line in here is a quote from Melville, and I'll read it. But the whale man, as he seeks the food of light, so he lives in light. And that food is the oil, which keeps the lamps going. Okay. From Green Therapeutics, this whale, Leviathan, ranges steaming, the whales, arch locomotives, aerial adjutants, rumble through green gateways, puckering garner, gabling on Dantaseat risings, purling pastures, weeping therapeutic silence, aqua combings, syllabi rewritings, days no longer injurious but supplicant, envious of wind traffic and eager for contraband, the skiff wardens calibrate glass, cloak uprising, cruising magisterial Harleys, sputtering breath declare, now is the last alert, the long lumberings jeopardized, the crazed gymnastic cleat splashes glaze, the twisted dashes, the fan tailing, lob peppering, frisk dives depleting. Now, pitched to a bravura coloratura, scorching the fathoms with rack lament, these monks of the deep, winching helium clairvoyance, enlist fox and seahorse, gorilla and chimpanzee, zebra and bobcat. These underliers, overseers, collect plasma sets, pith posses, deft marauders, fluke deserts, mountains, lowlands, mesas, hills, and trough, sanctify blowhole, the upright base, colt's hooves, searing, syncopation, wild manes, sweeping cerebral spheres. These swashbuckle prophets claw final scripture to outlaw unmusical barleys, vanishing vocabularies, drought chalk, stapled rhythm, dead tongue, with eyes seeing since the upper Cretaceous, 70 million year old eyes, eyes long looking, lashing the continuously initial. But the whale man, as he seeks the food of light, so he lives in light. So the whale lives in light and no light. Thank you. The next poem I'm going to read was inspired by a National Geographic article, which said playable tonal flutes dated around 7000 BCE have been unearthed in the central plains of ancient China. The flutes were made from red-crowned crane wing bones. Title of the poem is Flute Carved from the Wing Bone of a Red-Crowned Crane. Wing born too of flight, inheriting wing, loft bone, swirling through swathes of cumulus gong, shedding terrestrial surfeit marrow pilings, sledding through mnemonic collections, a whir construction, seanced to lift, to robe the tribe aloft. The flute is a wind instrument, traveling with, migrating. Alatunji, the African drum, migrates. Sabicus, the Spanish guitar, migrates. Casals, the Italian cello, migrates. Dolphy's flute, and left alone, migrates. Wind is breath, is chicory and due diligence, is soft and surreptition, circulation and suspense, is everywhere and absences apologia. Flute, built to fly like the crane, the flock migrating south hear it, scaling kinship glissades, hurling from rotational telekinetic watchtowers, here rumbling lurch-routed whale plaints from the fallen, the left behind. So what I'm trying to do in the poem here is you have this flock of cranes flying over, and they're hearing this flute music from down below, which is played on the bone of one of their own, the deceased, but not deceased, because the bone is now reanimated with a new breath, which they're being invigorated by. So you have this web of interactivity, this voluptuous intercourse. So I'll read that little section again. The flock migrating south hear it, scaling kinship facades, hurling from rotational telekinetic watchtowers, here rumbling lurch-routed whale plaints from the fallen, the left behind. Here, the benumbing rush to altitudinous sagacity spike, a last-ditch heave, disking coloratura songster stars thick with anthem, braiding tunefuls of scorch lament to restore umbilical breach. Now I'm going to read, I'm going to chance a project I'm just working on now. So this is the first section, and it's called Scurrilous Amber. A braid. This is a love story without a love object. Love without an object to plant that love is formless. This is a formless love story. P's and Q's grow restless and disrespectful. Vermilion puckers, then bickers. Altruistic gestures destabilize. There is mayhem in Moscow. Contradiction fertilizes fascination. Where in the aperture is sore. Formless is a renowned void surfer. This is a love story bordering on home remedies. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la. Going to end my reading with from my latest book, and the title, this is the last poem in the book, and the title is called Perambulate, and I'm kind of romancing the, let's say, the throat notion of sauntering, you know, kind of an aimless movement, where I like the idea of being lost, not getting off the grid, rather than being statistical. One is open to discoveries, accidents, etc. Perambulate, loosed from grid, from claustrophobic dampen, from clipped initiate, cleared to roam unfettered, galoshing through the puddle lumps, the rainbow alabasters, giddy, lush, howling through the flues of an anointed bellicosity, bric-a-brac, whirligig, bedazzle. Thank everybody for listening, having me on.
Thank you, Hella. Much appreciated. Great stuff. Next we hear from Jordan Dotson, who is the author of the 2024 novel, The Ballad of Falling Rock, and his short stories, criticism, and literary translations have appeared throughout the US, China, Singapore, and Japan. He was born in Appalachia and moved to China in 2005, to study classical poetry and folk music. And after over 14 years in Asia, he worked as a journalist, musician, and writing teacher. His co-written screenplay won the Jury Award in Narrative Shorts, more than 30 film festivals worldwide. And although he now resides in Boston, he still considers Southwest Virginia his home. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you guys for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'll be reading from my novel, The Ballad of Falling Rock. This novel is about 3 generations of a family of musicians in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. And the protagonist is a young man named Saul Crabtree, who is on the verge of musical success and fame, but who is facing obstacles within his family. Evelyn Crabtree fell into a brief coma in the winter of 1941. Dr. Johnson referred to her condition as meningitis, a word that practically danced in the mouth and whose definition Saul chose not to hear. Of the disease itself, Evelyn preferred no one at all hear, as living within its imperious jargon were vile accusations toward the beautiful things she saw in her final days. The moon had turned a deep shade of blue, she announced one sunny afternoon. The firstborn child of Betty's womb would be a changeling with dreadful table manners, but that child's own firstborn would be an angel. It was the immortals of the mountain who'd saved them, hiding her family in a grotto when Jackson's soldiers came for the march. The wind outside was playing secret chords, unwritable notes in every key, and all the world was in tears. Despite the agony of watching his mother waste away, Evelyn's final proclamation gave Saul an unnerving thrill. He suspected she'd discovered some unified truth, some pure harmonic convergence of the heart that God had never cared to explain. He continued pondering this suspicion, even as Evelyn referred to Betty as a foreigner slut for attempting to wash her feet. No one was offended, least of all Betty. In her final moments, Evelyn whispered softly to the Reverend, passed him the polished blue crystal locket she'd received from her mother on the day of their wedding, then squeezed his hands and gave up the breath of her life. Annie, Saul's sister, remained upstairs that evening, eating nothing, saying nothing, living committed to prayer and the production of tears until the funeral. Saul cried for 2 hours himself, though he wouldn't let anyone see him. Then he grew silent in an atmosphere of guilt. Had it been worry for his sake that had driven his mother to madness? Had he been a good son after all? Why did he suspect that there was no heaven, but still believed his mother had arrived at a place beyond all that is, her voice persisting in the pines? In the following weeks, the Reverend spent much time in prayer by Evelyn's grave, holding the locket in his hand the same way Betty still held her rosary. Watching his father made Saul worried, but it wasn't a feeling he'd discuss. His father was a truly powerful man, the kind grown in some pre-dawn time when man needed God, but not yet singing. A man who built their home with one hand while building a church with the other. God wouldn't dare allow a man such as him to wither. Yet wither he did. In the 3rd month after Evelyn's passing, the Reverend Crabtree picked at his food and stopped saying grace before dinner. With veins like maniac worms at his temples, He imbued his sermons with a quiet longing that seemed more like his son's songwriting than the thundering spectacle that had made his church the largest in Red Pine County. He'd get up each day with the chickens to pray, do his business in the old outhouse, which he still preferred to the new flush toilet, then return to bed until it was time again for prayer. He soon acquired a cough that shook the rafters, and Annie grew certain he was plagued by coal dust and demons. Each day she rushed home from piano lessons, sweeping and praying with a righteous ferocity that frightened Saul even more than his father's appearance. Then, in mid-May, Saul found his father sprawled on his mother's grave. He spoke in a sing-song that seemed like prayer, but also like gibberish, as he cradled Evelyn's necklace between his two hands. It was pneumonia, Dr. Johnson proclaimed with much befuddlement, wiping the sweat off his brow. That May day was the hottest on record, and marked the end of a period of time that Saul had referred to until then as life. By this time, Betty had decided that her husband and his sister were foolish. While the twins went about pretending him immortal, it was Betty who gave the Reverend his bath, Betty who brought him his King James Bible, then his Latins and Greeks, Betty who brought him his chewing tobacco, then his cornbread and warm milk just the way he liked it. They developed an odd communion then, and when the Reverend began to refer to Betty as daughter, Saul acknowledged the reality before him, that his father too was passing, and that no shame exists in searching for happiness within the valley of the shadow of death. The Reverend Thomas Jefferson Crabtree said his last prayer exactly 4 months and 1 day after the death of his wife, Evelyn. After waving off breakfast, he closed his eyes and made a proclamation. "I'm tired, daughter. I think I'll die today." And so he did, but not before patting Betty's stomach and saying, "This one's going to be a preacher." When he passed, he did so singing a hymn that neither of his children had heard before, a hymn about reunion, and thus Dr. Johnson listed the cause of death as a broken heart. He couldn't live without her, the doctor said, as Annie's wails shook dust from the rafters and the walls. Saul listened to his sister scratching the floorboards bloody in the attic overhead. He heard the echoes of his mother's prayers, saw his father's skin like bone and his papery eyelids smiling. He watched Betty crying on a footstool and saw her twiddling with twin blue necklaces. One she'd carried away from Philadelphia, the other a final gift from his father. He saw the magic that had passed between them, his wife and father, when Betty had whispered that the child would be a boy. And the sadness rushing over him then was so pure and sharp that it was joyous. The congregations of 11 churches came to the Reverend's funeral. Saul worked all night to dig the grave himself, beside his mother's in rocky soil, beneath a towering shortleaf pine that lorded over 85 acres of land, which now belonged to him. Facing the morning sun, the crowd broke forth in amazing grace, and Saul alone among them did not sing. When he pitched in the first shovelful of dirt, he felt no grief, and no tears came. It was not the loss of parents he was experiencing, not a wave goodbye. The loss was not in him, nor without, but was him entirely. The loss of his self, such as a man can only experience when his father dies. A sudden clarity that the man he had been had never existed at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Next, we have from Kristen Case, who is a poet and scholar. Kristen is the author of American Pragmatism and Poetic Practice, Cross Currents from Emerson to Susan Howe, and 3 books of poetry, most recently Daphne with Tupelo Press. Her book, Henry David Thoreau's Calendar, will be published with Milkweed Editions in November. Kristen lives in Maine. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you so much. It's a real luxury to get to go last and just like listen to all these amazing readings. So thanks for the invitation and thanks to my fellow readers. So I'm going to read just one long poem from my book, Daphne, which has just arrived recently, which is a real delight because it took a long time to write and a long time to find a home. So I'm thrilled that it's Tupelo has brought it into the world. So this poem that I'm going to read is called Horror Vacui, kind of fear of the void. And it is a kind of long poem meditating on the long association between women and nothingness or emptiness in Western culture and particularly the Western philosophical tradition. So it's there's some kind of references to Plato and Parmenides. And then the only other kind of background information that I wanted to provide is that there's sort of some thinking also about the Eliot-Hale letters. So T.S. Eliot, if folks don't know, had a long relationship with a woman named Emily Hale, who in her later years donated Eliot's letters to Princeton University with the stipulation that they not be opened until 50 years after whichever of them died last. So like quite a conservative, policy, like everyone will be dead. It won't matter at all. And the really remarkable kind of fact about this whole episode is that Eliot felt compelled to write an accompanying letter that would be opened when the letters were opened, disavowing the whole relationship. And so like disavowing all the letters that he wrote that are in the packet. So the archivist just opened them. I think it was 2015 or 2016. Anyway, fairly recently, maybe 2020. And it is a fascinating, that letter is a fascinating document. So there's also some kind of thinking about Eliot and his relationship to Emily Hale in the poem. And I think that's it. There may be one or two other weird little references, but you can just let them wash over you. It's a lot of meditating about nothing. That's what this poem is really about. So, and it has 4 epigraphs. Horror Vacui. We can speak and think only of what exists, and what exists is uncreated and imperishable, for it is whole and unchanging and complete. It was not nor shall be different, since it is now all at once and one and continuous. Parmenides on Nature. The old problem of the void is now wholly superseded by the problem of reference to the non-existent. The distinction has gradually been drawn between empty space with all its subtle and complex properties and nothing, which I will argue has no properties at all. J.K. Swindler, Parmenides' Paradox, Negative Reference, and Negative Existentials. The Pyrrhic is rightfully dismissed. Its existence is either ancient or in either ancient or modern rhythm is purely chimerical, and the insisting on so perplexing a nonentity as a foot of 2 short syllables affords perhaps the best evidence of the gross irrationality and subservience to authority which characterize our prosody. That's Edgar Allan Poe in The Rationale of Verse. That's a fair thought to lie between maids' legs, and that, of course, is Shakespeare's Hamlet. 1. Empty space with all its complex and subtle properties flowers in the dark month. A difference in invisibles multiplies. A gray-blue dawn, dawning gray-blue in the dawn. A spatial void would require an idiom. The snow begins its steady disappearance, little pockets of air in the lace, a crystalline. Wholly superseded, you show an understandable tendency, a low purple light, a portion of internal air, but no properties, no properties at all. 2. For among these Februaries is one so endlessly February that only by Februarying through it will your heart survive. You begin to formulate a theory of non-feeling as an interpersonal event. On the bright concrete, 1 or 2 trees make a thicket of shadows. A list of forms that include emptiness would be a list of all forms, a plenum of forms. Non-feeling as something that can be received and absorbed into the self, as a positive absence, a discrete void. For example, Eliot's Portrait of a Lady, her lilacs. 3. The philosophical articles are full of warnings about the differences between non-being and the void. As a non-philosopher, I largely ignore these warnings. The feeling of non-being or void is distinct from what I call the garbage feeling, but closely related. The subject of my study is the transformation of one into the other. The light is lighting things successively. Certain distinctions present themselves. One of the Februaries is called evening. You proceed on the premise of a regular forgetting. This vacancy lasts a certain number of minutes, which can be arrested at the location desired. A mid-sized oblivion, infinitely repeatable. In a book, you read about the almost unfathomable emptiness of atoms. On the internet, you read about famous misogynists. 4. Consider violence as a movement between bodies, first inside to outside, then outside to inside. If mood or feeling can be transferred between persons by means of, for example, infinitely repeatable sound sequences shared via text message, void may also be a kind of currency. When you are not feeling the garbage feeling, it is difficult to believe in it. Your atoms seem no emptier than anybody else's. Globes of light along the gray-brown body of the lilac, lichen on the rain-dark bodies of the trees. But it is true that you often feel like a container. Receptacle is the word you think. Note, void as a kind of currency. 5. The ancient physicians were concerned with the operation of void in the body. For example, Erastotreus held that the circulation of bodily fluid was driven by the imperative to prevent the formulation of a vacuum. I think of Simone Weil thinking about the Iliad and starving herself, her body, herself. In the Timaeus, Plato asserts the existence of a third kind of being alongside forms and the images of forms. He calls it an invisible and formless being which receives all things and in some mysterious way partakes of the intelligible and is most incomprehensible. He calls this third kind, which is the amorphous stuff out of which the craftsman makes the world, the receptacle. Sometimes he calls it the mother substance. It is true that sometimes I seek confirmation of the garbage feeling. I put this down to a drive for, at the least, certainty. 6. Any description of the void is, of course, a metaphor. The garbage feeling may be accompanied by a particular kind of coldness localized to the body, a kind of solipsistic weather. In the pre-cosmic state, the state prior to the invention of the craftsman, the receptacle is subject to erratic and disorderly motions, and it moves its contents in turn. Its contents are mere traces. That's Plato. Of all the things that I could tell you, what happened explains the least. Parmenides describes the universe as a plenum, a wall of being. His word is eon, with no cracks in it. 7. Aristotle, too, believed the void to be impossible because of the way matter keeps rushing in. He defines void as a place with no thing in it. Goldfinches cluster near the plastic feeder, still in their winter feathers. Dark pours out from the open doors into the greater dark. A layer of hard snow covers the yard and the visible roofs. Subject to erratic and disorderly motions, you practice shifting your address. Outside, the dark occupies things generally, though some of the windows are lit. Space, with all of its subtle and complex properties, intercedes first between the broad, dark branches of fir trees, and then between the thin, particular branches of maple trees. Of course, this order is imaginary. In fact, the subtle and complex properties are everywhere at once. 9. Annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade. That's Andrew Marvell. Note, Pyrrhic spondi, Pyrrhic spondi. 10. The transferability of non-feeling suggests an occult relation. The emptiness of your atoms nods to the emptiness of mine. In voidier moods, I browse the love letters and biographies of famous misogynists like a wolf circling a trap. Eliot made it a rule that they could not dine together on consecutive nights. I bookmark the one with the photograph of the letters and the lengthy statement of disavowal addressed to a distant future. 11. Imagine Eliot saying eon, 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 eon into the distant future, a wide trochaic wall. Imagine a Pyrrhic threat beginning in your atoms and leaking everywhere. Imagine void had a touchable body. Imagine wanting to end it. The typed envelopes are tied with a ribbon. Imagine the nothing you would feel untying it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen. I don't know if we can imagine untying it, actually. But yeah, what a wonderful feature today. Thank you so much, Eleanor, Hella, Jordan, and Kristen. We hear from our technical director, John Wesseck, who has written over 1 million words in poems, short stories, and novels. Many of his works have appeared in journals such as I-70 Review, Patterson Literary Review, and Unlikely Stories. He's regional editor of the San Diego Poetry Annual and host of the Gelato East Fiction Open Mic. His latest book, Reductio ad Absurdium, is a collection of parodies. John lives in Manchester, New Hampshire, and longs for gene editing to bring giant wombats back from extinction.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I have inducted another victim, honoree, into my Writer's Things series. Jeffrey Cyphers writes Puppet Rufus resembles Reynard the Fox, who reminds me of Renault, cars banned in the US due to their unfortunate habit of distracting drivers by reciting Carolingian sagas in Occitan. The French word for lemon reminds me of Citron, another brand you can't get here. Too bad I'd like to drive a Citroen DS while wearing a trench coat, fedora, and 44 Magnum revolver in a shoulder holster, just like Eddie Constantine in Alphaville. Of course, they won't let you have a Smith & Wesson 29 in France because they distract the editors of Cahiers du Cinema with Clint Eastwood's lines from Dirty Harry, forcing me to defend myself with words. Du con, Conan, dégage, and do you feel lucky, punk? Won't strop cocaine-addled bears or mutant Venus flytraps crossbred with great white sharks. A tough secret agent needs something more potent, like a Leclerc main battle tank or guard dog. German shepherds are out due to France's troubled history with its neighbor. Bred in the French-speaking part of Belgium, a Malinois might be acceptable to Parisians. It would be hard to fit one under my coat, though.
Oh,
Ah,
oh, John, you verbal fire hose you. Thank you so much for referencing my little Rufus. Rufus hasn't made an appearance. I'm gonna have to go look for him, right?
Yeah, we miss Rufus.
Uh,
what's Rufus doing at the moment?
I think he's like he has a hangover.
Okay, okay, okay. Is a cold shower and espresso?
Yeah, thanks for asking, man. Uh,
Right.
hey, so what a great reading today. That was so excellent. So many different voices, such beautiful lines all through. And I know we have at least, I'm pretty sure we have at least two open readers. If anybody else wants to read, let me know. And that being said, let me introduce the Carcinogenic Bride author, uh, my friend Cindy Cimarron Hockman. Cindy.
You got Cimarron, but I'll take it. I've been called worse. And the and the book I'm reading from is my newer one called Telling You Everything. And I am going to read the title poem, which is the first poem in here. And it's a prose poem. And in honor of my Australian sister who isn't here and I miss her. It's only 5 lines. And it starts off with an epigraph from the great Charles Simic, who wrote, "Be brief and tell us everything." And that's how I got the title of the book and the poem. I am all moan and bone and dangling participles. I am all pipes and drums, but no voice box. My body is hamstrung and jagged. I am a bellyful of barren. These days, I have become nothing but chocolate bars and razor blades. Thank you.
Ooh, that was sharp. Powerful, really, though, huh? So I have a question, but I'm gonna ask Bob Heeman. Let me introduce Bob. Bob, are you ready for us, man, with your
Yes.
information and your bears and your moon glow? All right, Bob Heeman.
Okay, here's something. Hold on 1 minute. The scene. One is able to see what can be seen. The difference always how it is interpreted. The man or woman, also animals that have sprung from the forest. Their calls confused with the language the bears or birds might use if suddenly startled. Thanks.
Woo, that's what we are, man. Suddenly startled. Great, Bob. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, man. It's great to have you all. Hey, listen, I just wanted to ask a question to Kristen here about what were you saying? You were using the word Pyrrhic in like two different ways, or
I don't think so.
so you were going Pyrrhic
Oh
Sponde?
yeah, those lines. So it was a little I mean uh um the in that line, which
Yeah.
is, let me get it. Make sure I have it right. I don't want to misquote it.
Marvel, you're quoting Marvel.
Yeah, of a green. Oh, it's terrible that I don't have it by heart.
But what is it, a Pyrrhic sponde?
So, well, no, it's just scanning the line. So it's to a green thought in a green shade. To a green thought. So it's a Pyrrhic and then a spondy and then a Pyrrhic and then a spondy.
What is a Pyrrhic?
Oh, so a Pyrrhic is two. Well, Poe says it can't exist, but a Pyrrhic is two, a foot, a metrical foot that's two unstressed lines.
I was going to look it up, but I just
Philosophically, he says
no.
can't be both unstressed or it would have no, it's a kind of a philosophical debate, but I just wanted to put, it's like, it seemed to me very similar to Parmenides' idea that nothing can't exist. Like we can't have, like nothing is an impossible idea. So in the same way, Poe is saying a Pyrrhic is not possible because you have to have something to offset the nothing, if that makes sense.
I was thinking of Pyrrhic victory, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the Pyrrhic metrical foot takes its name after the Pyrrhic victory.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah, sorry to be, this is really in the weeds, prosody stuff.
Good to know. Hey, Mark, what's next?
So we next have your show, which is coming up. When exactly is that? Let's
yes, we have a good lineup on the 28th of May, Saturday, 2 weeks.
31st.
I'm sorry, the 31st. Thank you, Mark.
Yep. Joanna Sitz, Thomas Fink, Mark Ari, and Sheila E. Murphy. So we'll be looking forward to that. And thank you guys for this amazing show today. You just made me think, Kristen, of a poem of mine, which is called 000. And it's a little dialogue between 0 and O. 0.
8.
Either way, each of these represent nothing more than an empty exasperation, a sigh at most. O. Still, out of nothingness of the furthest cosmos emerged something that was a little more than 0. 0. Oh, so, you're saying I'm less than 0? How can nothing be the beginning of something? Oh. A mellow wind stirs the snow in the stars now.
Oh, sweet, man.
And so, on that note, I thank you, and thank you all for a fantastic reading. And hope to see you on the 31st. And live well, prosper, lots of poetry and love. Let's hope our society maintains sanity. We shall see. Thanks, everybody, for tonight. Lots of love.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. That's great.
Likewise.